And she's tackling a really interesting issue, which is plastics in freshwater bodies. And so she's going to be talking a little bit about rivers as conduits for waste plastic. And I would just like to point out that this is something that is quite new in South Africa and also globally. There's been a lot of work done in the marine environment, but less so in actually looking at the ways in which much of the plastic reaches the marine environment. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Eleanor has been finding out.
Thank you. I'm going to turn these. Is that okay? Can everyone see? Thank you so much, and thank you for coming to the third lecture of this series on plastic pollution. As Colleen said, I'm going to be discussing rivers and how they act as sources of plastic into the ocean. And I'm going to draw quite a lot on the research I've been doing, which some of it has not yet been processed, but I'll give you a few tastes of what is still to come. So I always like to start these lectures off with a little thought experiment. We know we come into contact with plastic a lot every day, but these images, they're before and after images of typical rooms in a typical middle-income household, before when plastic is present and after when it's been taken away. So we have a typical scene in a bathroom, taking a bath in the evening, and if you take plastic away, you can see shock, horror. There's little you can do in the bathroom without plastic. Again, in the lounge, even the paint on the walls, the carpets, all the technology is gone. How can we live without watching TV in the evenings these days? And then lastly, in the kitchen, preparing food would be pretty challenging these days if we couldn't use plastic. And just these images reiterate what Peter and Vonica have been saying, that we use plastics every day, they're found everywhere, and everything from your typical things you often think about, like the food industry, your plastic spoons, coffee cups, the polystyrene trays that we use a lot of. Technology wouldn't be around or where it is today without plastic. The science industries, and especially a lot of the research we do, uses a lot of plastic. Your medical waste is incredible if you think of all the pipettes that you throw away after just using once. And it was pretty ironic on the last field trip that we did, pretty much all of our equipment was plastic. So we couldn't do the research that we're doing today without using plastic. And then it's also found in things that we don't often think about as having plastic in them. A lot of wet wipes have a thin plastic sheeting that doesn't disintegrate. Your clothing, as Vana explained, a lot of the synthetic fleeces are made of plastic, release a lot of plastic through your washing machines. Tea bags. I was absolutely horrified to learn this year that some brands of tea bags have a very thin plastic shell that they then lay the paper over. And you can see lovely images on the internet of tea bags that have been thrown into compost heaps, and the paper is disintegrating, the tea leaves are gone, but this shell still remains. And then also, as Van also said, a lot of your facial cleansing products have microbeads in them, a lot of toothpaste, but these are starting to be banned in a lot of countries. And as cliched as it is, plastic is fantastic. Our society wouldn't be where it is today if we didn't use plastic as much as we do. But we have developed a throwaway society. Of all the plastic that has ever been made, 9% has been recycled, 12% incinerated, but the vast majority, 79%, has been thrown into landfills or dumped into the environment. And it's really this plastic that is entering the environment that I want to focus on today. And the problem with it entering the environment is that it takes a really long time to disappear. As Peter mentioned yesterday, it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. So even biodegradable plastic often doesn't degrade. It doesn't go away completely. And a lot of this plastic entering the environment ends up in the oceans. A lot of research since the 70s has been focusing on marine plastics. It's where the bulk of the research has been done. It's a shocking image to see of a seal or a whale caught up in ropes, turtles ingesting plastic. So it's caught the attention of the public, especially recently. And so a lot of work has been done on it. And just to remind you of what Peter said yesterday, approximately 5 trillion pieces of plastic floating on the surface of the ocean, and that weighs 250,000 tons. And that is a vast underestimate because it doesn't include all the stuff that is on the bottom of the ocean. So there really is a lot in the oceans. And this really hit home in this holiday. I went away with my family to a very small country that is very far away. I'm still slightly jet lagged, so if I say anything stupid, please forgive me. But I don't know if anyone recognizes this flag. No, you guys don't. So this is the flag of Belize. It's a tiny country in Central America. So it's just south of the border with Mexico, and Guatemala kind of surrounds it. One of the only English-speaking countries in Central and South America. So we jetted off there because my dad is a crazy fly fisherman, and you tend to go to crazy places with nature lovers. And we spent quite a lot of time on a very small island. It was about an hour's boat ride from the mainland. It's called Tarpon Key. They only take about 8 guests at a time. You can walk around the entire island in 20 minutes or so. So it's really small, absolutely beautiful. You wake up to views like this of the beautiful ocean. But if you take a quick walk away from where the cabanas are, you're greeted with this. And this was all stuff on the windward side of the island. It gets really gusty over there. And it's all this plastic just washing up. This was the pathway that you're supposed to walk on. And it's just absolutely covered in everything from polystyrene trays to bottles to huge buckets are washing up. And if you ask the local Belizean people, why is there all this trash here? They're like, oh, it's not our trash. We don't have anything to do with it. It's coming from Honduras, it's coming from the rivers, from Guatemala. It's not our problem. There's nothing we can do about it. And so this is kind of the question that scientists have moved on to asking, where is all this plastic coming from? And dumping of plastic has been banned since 1989. Of course, it still happens illegally. Peter spoke about those bottles that he suspects a Chinese ship had dumped at sea, washing up on Inaccessible Island. But we really don't think that illegal dumping is a major source, or not the biggest source. You do get accidental spills. This is a photo that Von showed of the nurdle spill that happened in Durban Harbour in 2017. And just to show you, these are what nurdles look like. I don't know if you can actually see that, but they're pretty small and very numerous. So millions and millions of them wash into the ocean. Once they're in, they're very, very difficult to get out. And spills in Asia have really caused huge economic effects. A lot of the aquaculture farms, all their fish died from ingesting these nurdles. So yes, accidental spills are definitely a source. But what we're focusing more and more on are your land-based sources, especially looking at rivers. Rivers a lot of them are really big, and what they do is they connect what's happening on the interior of the countries right through to the ocean. So if there's lots of dumping and rubbish being thrown into the rivers inland, it can get washed into the oceans. And so people are really starting to try to quantify the plastic loads in different rivers across the world. This was a paper that Peter mentioned. This paper looked at mismanaged waste in coastal cities across the globe. So the white bits are countries that don't border on the coast. And they estimated that between 5 and 12 million tons of plastic are entering the ocean every single year from these coastal cities. And South Africa, they ranked all the different countries that they looked at. South Africa fared pretty badly. We were 11th worst in the world in terms of mismanaged waste in our coastal cities. China was by far number 1, but we were 3rd worst in Africa. So we had Egypt at number 7, Nigeria at number 9, and then South Africa at number 11. And they estimated that South Africans, we generate about 2 kilograms of waste every single day per person, and about 12% of that is plastic. But the really shocking figure, or number they came up with, is that 56% of the waste generated in South Africa is mismanaged. So that means it's being dumped, it's on the streets, it's in huge landfills that are not covered properly or contained properly, and so it can blow into waterways and blow into the ocean. And we are pretty bad. Brazil is only 11%, and the USA is as low as 2%. So a lot of this mismanaged waste can end up in rivers. There's a river in the Philippines, and you can see plastic pollution in rivers can be really, really bad. I don't even want to try to guess how many pieces of plastic in that river, and as soon as it rains, this plastic is likely to flush into the ocean. And of course, having huge detrimental effects to this freshwater ecosystem. Ooh, that was fast. There we go. So plastic pollution in rivers can be immense, and what people are doing now these days is going to individual rivers and quantifying the amount of plastic and the types of plastic found in those rivers. So as an example, this was a study published a few years ago now, looking at the Danube River in Europe. It's the second largest river in Europe. And they used a number of nets over 2 years and counted the number of pieces of plastic and fish larvae. And they found more plastic in the river than fish larvae, which is phenomenal. And they estimated about 4.2 tons of plastic are flowing into the ocean from this one river every single day. And we don't often think of Europe as being bad in terms of litter. You know, we just think of good recycling systems. They're starting to introduce a lot of plastic-free shops. But even in Europe, the situation can be pretty dire. This was another paper published in 2017. It got a lot of coverage in the press. It took a more global perspective. They used a number of other studies and tried to model and estimate how much plastic is being pumped into the ocean by the world's rivers. And what they found was this. This was kind of the key image in their paper. And the different circles, different amounts of plastic. So the big circles with the thick outline is more than 20,000 tons of plastic per year. You can see we get these hot spots. So kind of Central America, the north of South America, West Africa is pretty bad. But the vast majority is coming from Asia, which is similar to what that previous study found with the coastal cities. In total, they estimate between 1.15 and 2.41 million tons of plastic being pumped into the ocean every year by rivers, and 67% of that is coming from Asia. Africa, not contributing as much, but still 7.8%, it's quite a lot if you think of all the rivers in Africa. The thing with this paper, when I first read it, I was like, oh, shock, horror, but started to, look at it a bit more closely. And we were taught from first, always have a cynical eye when you're looking at a paper that uses modeling. And your data, the outputs that you get and the estimates that you can make are only as good as the data that you put into the model. And if you put terrible data in, you're going to get terrible estimates. And this paper didn't use any data from Africa. So they used a lot of data, mostly from Europe and North America, and used that to estimate across the whole world. So we can debate whether or not we think this is accurate. And so my project was, and just to show you as an illustration, most of the research being done today on rivers is from the Northern Hemisphere, as is often the case in science. We have one paper in a river in South Africa, one from Brazil, and then it's not an exhaustive list, but just to illustrate, most of the other papers have been published either in North America or in Europe, and a few from China. So we really have this lack of knowledge of what's going on in the Southern Hemisphere. And so my project, my master project, is kind of born out of this. I spoke to Peter about, possibly doing a master's, and I said, I want to go catch freshwater birds and see if they're ingesting plastic. And he was like, Eleanor, take 10 steps back, because we don't know what's in the rivers in the first place. So I trotted off to the Orange and Vaal rivers. Varnica came with me. And the Orange River is the largest river in South Africa. It stretches some 3,000 kilometers from the highlands of Lesotho all the way across the country and drains into the Atlantic Ocean at Alexander Bay, up in the Northern Cape on the border with Namibia. And it's really an important source of fresh water, especially to the farms in the Northern Cape. A lot of them irrigate from the river, and there's also a number of big dams on the river where people get water from. The largest tributary of the Orange River is the Vaal River. It starts up in close to Breyten in Mpumalanga, and it flows all the way along the entire catchment. It kind of encompasses the industrial heartland of South Africa. So a lot of the rivers coming out of Joburg, out of the mining area of Mpumalanga, flow into the Vaal River. And so these two rivers together make a fantastic study site because we can compare them. What we expect to see is a lot more plastic, microplastics and big macro debris in the Vaal River, a lot more populated, a lot more people, a lot of industry happening in that area, compared to the Orange River, which flows through pretty rural areas of South Africa. It's mostly farmlands, no big cities on the banks of the river. And so we went off and tested the water for plastic. We used a variety of methods and went to some pretty cool remote places. This was a fantastic bridge that had been abandoned for a very long time. We were greeted by a herd of goats, pretty exciting. Sampled a lot below dam walls to see if dams are trapping plastic. We used a variety of methods. We filtered bulk water samples. We did observations of large macro debris in the river, and we also used a Newstar nets, very similar to the ones that Peter was showing us yesterday that they use on the ships. That was to look for mesoplastic. This is us filtering water, so you fill up a 10-liter container and tip it over and filter it through a 25-micron mesh. And we did that at bridges along the river. We had about 60 sites, and we also sampled along the dams. We also hired 2 boats, one on the Vaal Dam, one on the Garib Dam. So those are the 2 largest dams in South Africa. And yeah, we traveled across the country, did about 10,000 kilometers, went up into Lesotho, and we even managed to stuff up the Fitzbucky, which didn't make it home. So Peter was really happy about that. And a lot of the data I'm still processing, so unfortunately I can't share the entire picture with you at the moment. But what I can show you is what we found. So we sampled twice, once in April last year and once in December. So April was the end of the rainy season, December the beginning of the rainy season. And I can show you what we found in terms of microplastics in the river in April, so the first sampling site. So these are this is not from my data, but this is the kind of things we would see, lots and lots and lots of little fibers in the water. And you can map it out. Bigger circles obviously mean more fibers per liter of water. Your smaller circles are fewer. And this is the kind of thing you see, which was not what we expected. I was pretty confused when I saw this. But here's the Orange River coming out of Lesotho. Here's the Vaal River, the confluence in Douglas in the Northern Cape. And you can see a lot more plastic in the lower reaches of the Orange River. These are in the Northern Cape sites. So the border post between South Africa and Namibia, and then a few around small towns, but really not what we expected at all. We expected a lot more plastic up here, and then not so much down here. And so we racked our brains a little bit. And what we think is happening, we need to compare to the beginning of the rainy season, but what we think is happening is some sort of turbulent mixing in the river. When we went sampling, it had been pouring with rain up here in the eastern part of the country, and the river was just this torrent of water. We could hardly ever use the net because there was just so much water pumping through the river. All the floodgates of the dams were open. It was really quite phenomenal. They had huge floods in Joburg and in Mpumalanga. So what we think is happening is that all this rain washed the plastic away, but the water hadn't yet reached these areas. So what we then did is, and compared to up in the east, it hadn't really rained here, so the river wasn't flowing as much. We think maybe the plastics were more easily accessible. It was a lot shallower in the Northern Cape compared to, it was like 4 or 5 meters deep at some points in the east part of the country. So it asks questions of transport in rivers, which people are starting to address and starting to use models and trying to figure it all out. But we'll have to compare this data to what we see in the dry season, and hopefully it makes the picture a bit clearer. And in terms of flooding, it has been shown to wash plastic away. This was a fantastic paper published last year where they took sediment samples from 40 sites in various rivers in the northwest of England. And there was a huge flood on Boxing Day in 2015. And they had samples from before the flood and then samples a few months after the flood once the water had settled down again. And they compared microplastic load of the sediments before and after the flood. So again, bigger circles, more plastic at that site. This is before the flood. And after the flood, you can see quite a dramatic decrease. All these with the little bars underneath are a significant decrease in plastic. And they estimated that about 40 billion pieces of plastic were washed down these rivers in the single flood, and it all went into the ocean. There's mostly microbeads from facial cleansers. So yeah, it was 40 billion. I can't even comprehend that. In terms of macro debris in the Orange River, we didn't see that much. We only saw, so what we do is we'd stand on the bridge for 2 15-minute intervals and observe the river, and if you saw anything floating down, you would mark that out. We really didn't see very much. We only saw plastic at 5 sites. The worst sites were the 2 tributaries coming out of the Joburg area, quite a few bottles and bottle caps, but really not as bad as what you see if you go to the Black River or to Sewage close to Muizenberg. Of course, the method is biased. You're only going to see larger floating pieces, but that's why we also use the net, which the data I'm still processing. So it doesn't look like it's too bad. The river looks like this. It looks beautiful. It's a great place to go and do field work. And so far, what we think is happening, not really a major source of large plastic into the ocean. Even the beach, we went to the river mouth, that beach is pretty clean. So nothing like that river that I showed you in the Philippines. But it really, in terms of microplastics, we're not entirely sure what's going on. It really, asks questions of transport in rivers. But hopefully it will become clearer. So I'm just going to take you back to this image that Peter showed us yesterday. It looks like coastal litter in South Africa is more to do with the large cities. Cape Town, PE, East London, Durban, it's local sources of plastic. We can't blame Joburg. It's not their plastic that's coming down the Orange River. It points to kind of failing municipalities. We can really fix it at the local scale. We can't be like the Belizeans and say it's not our fault, it's not our country. So we can really do something about it, which is great. This is another paper looking at microplastic. The previous one was meso pieces using sieves. Microplastics are a very similar pattern. This is your mean annual runoff. You can see the Orange River, by far the most turbid river in South Africa. And it would be fantastic to go and sample in these rivers up the Eastern Cape. People are starting to pay attention there and are starting to sample. So it'll be very interesting to see what they get coming out of those rivers. And as I said, it's kind of failing municipalities coming out of local storm drains and sewage works and that kind of thing. And so moving on, we know that there is plastic in rivers. It might not be a lot, it is there, sometimes it is a lot. And so the next question that we're asking, and kind of where my research is moving on to, is sources of plastic into rivers. Why is it in the rivers? Where is it coming from? What can we do about it? And there are various sources into rivers. I'm just going to talk about these 3 because I feel like they're kind of ones that we don't often think about. And I'll go through them one by one. But I just want to make the point that rivers are a fantastic study site to look at sources into the environment because you can detect these point sources. You can go out and measure water from a wastewater treatment plant. Compared to in the ocean, we see all this plastic, we have no idea where it's coming from. Pretty difficult to disentangle all these different sources. So quantifying what's coming out of these different sources is really important because we can do something about it. So the first, looking at storm drains. Storm drains are designed, they're put into cities to get rid of large amounts of water as quickly as possible to stop flooding during a storm. And so they often, mostly they're not treated. The water literally just goes straight out into the river from all the roads or into the ocean. So whatever is on those streets is going to be washed through these drains along with the water. And in the 1990s, they estimated about 780,000 tons of waste were entering the South African drainage systems every single year. And so, I mean, the 1990s is a pretty long time ago. We wanted to go out and test what's happening now. So I went and I put nets over 3 storm drains. It's very glamorous work. You look beautiful after a day of sampling here. The one was in Milnerton, a residential area, Pardon Island, industrial area. This one flows straight into the Black River, or Salt River at that point. And the one in Sea Point, which is a commercial area. And this goes straight into the ocean, the one at Sea Point. And what I do is I go and put a net over the drain just before it starts raining, leave it out for the duration of the rain, and then take it off and empty it. And I take whatever's in the net back to UCT, sort it, like there's a lot of vegetation, take that out, dry it, weigh it, and then sort out all the different litter items. So, and I counted everything from wood pieces, metal, and a lot of plastic. And the kind of things that you find, if you take an average, so far done 6 rain events, on average in Milnerton, not that much. It was pretty clean. The streets there are really clean. It's quite an upper class area. Only about 5 to 6 items per rain event per hectare of the drainage area for that drain. And on average, they weighed about 2.4 grams. Compare that to Sea Point, where you get close to 200 items per rain event. And I mean, this net was just absolutely full. It was horrible. I'd go back to UCT with like 3 or 4 bags of rubbish. So it was really not great what's happening there. And those weighed about 93, on average 93 grams per event per hectare. The Pardon Island was by far the worst. It's a smaller drainage area and a lot of trash coming out of it. Close to 500 items per rain event per hectare, and weighing almost 300 grams. And a lot of the stuff coming out of Pardon Island was these huge chunks of polystyrene, a lot of food packaging, so people having lunch, chucking their stuff on the ground and going back to work, a lot of cigarette storm peas or cigarette butts. Those are found everywhere, they're disgusting. But what really shocked me about Pardon Island is the one day Yvonne and I went down after the raining, and I see these tiny little things in the net, and I'm like, no, can't be. And we go closer, and I jump down into the canal, and I was like, Yvonne, there are nurdles coming out of this drain. And this drain is only about 500 meters from the ocean. And everyone says, nurdles are just in the ocean because of accidental spills. But it really is, and the factories in that area are told again and again and again to control your waste, control your spills of nurdles. But it's entering the wastewater system and going straight out into the ocean. So that was pretty scary to see that. And overall, most of it was plastic, 67% if you use a count. 21% were your cigarette butts. Most of those are from Sea Point. By mass, 63% plastic, so very similar. Your storm peas are very light, so that only made up 8% by mass. But the scary thing about this study is if you do a very crude extrapolation across the entire city of Cape Town, 53 million pieces of trash every single time it rains. So it's 31 tons. It's really pretty scary with an estimate. Even if it's a lot less than this, it's still a lot of trash coming out of those systems. But the great thing about storm drains is that we can do something about it. Professor Neil Armitage, he's a professor at UCT. 20 years ago, he came up with these really efficient litter traps that you put close to the drains, and it takes the trash out of the water system. Unfortunately, they have not been used in South Africa yet, but have been used successfully overseas in Canada, Australia, and other countries. So the City of Cape Town is looking at various ways to get this trash out of the storm drains, but we will see what happens in the near future. So then going to your wastewater treatment plants. The wastewater treatment plants treat sewage. They have various different methods of getting the water clean again, go through different processes. Different treatment plants will use different combinations of the processes. But generally what they do is they'll have a screen that takes out your large solids. They'll have settling tanks, so the stuff is just left in a tank Anything that will sink and remain in what they call sludge, and it goes through various other processes before finally being let out again into the environment. So people have gone, like I said, a lot of your clothing stuff has microplastics in it. So people have gone and tested the effluent coming out of your wastewater treatment plants for plastic, and they find that they're pretty efficient. So your primary treatment removes about 78 to 98% of plastics in that water, and your secondary treatment can increase that to close to 100%. And so you get very few pieces of microplastic per litre of water. But again, the problem is that these treatment plants pump so much water every single day that even very few pieces per litre of water, there is still some coming out of these treatment plants, and people have gone and tested water in rivers just downstream and found quite a lot. But overall, we are it is a pretty good system, but there are ways to make it better, and people are working on this. But it's not just microplastics. 2 honors engineering students at UCT last year did their honors project looking at whether earbud sticks can get through wastewater treatment plants. And they went to, I think it was 4 or 5 plants in Cape Town, and they did observations at the various stages of the treatment, and they found quite a few earbud sticks coming out of those treatment plants. And so, I mean, these things are really thin if you look at them long ways, so they can get through pretty easily. So we really need to start looking at ways to get these out more effectively. Looking at sewage sludge, so your treatment plants, they get the plastic out of the water, but most of the plastic is removed during the settling process. As I said, it gets put in these big containers, everything is allowed to settle, and about 80% of the microplastics settle out in this stage of the treatment. And that gets retained in your sludge. Now, the problem with this is that the sludge is used as fertilizer, and it's applied to farmlands. Especially in Europe, 4 to 5 million tons of sludge is applied to your farmlands every year. And people have estimated, pretty difficult to quantify on such a big scale again, but more than 400,000 tons of plastic are being added to farmlands every year. So that's, again, a lot. I always think of plastic pollution, it's a game of numbers, these numbers you can't even comprehend. So, so soils in farmlands can act as long-term sinks of plastic. We still need to figure out what it's doing there. People are starting to study how it's affecting, soil microbes, that kind of thing, soil processes. But the big thing is that erosion, if that soil gets washed into your rivers, that can then get washed into the ocean. So not fantastic. Oh, that arrow's not supposed to be there. And so pretty much you can sum up this entire talk. I've spoken for a while, but we'll have time for questions, which is nice. You can sum it all up in a diagram. We have a river, and we have various sources of plastic into the river. Storm drains coming from your cities, big source of plastic, especially your big items. Your wastewater treatment plants, the effluent does have some plastic in it that is being released into the rivers. But the big thing from the treatment plants is your sewage sludge, and that gets washed into the rivers through soil erosion. And then there are also other sources that I haven't had time to talk about, like your atmospheric fallout. Von mentioned that we're breathing in microplastics. There's a fantastic study done in Paris looking at the amount of plastic raining out of the atmosphere. It's quite a lot. That can also fall into the rivers. Dumping, again, a big problem, especially in areas, if you go to the Black River just before it starts raining and you watch what happens to the river as it starts raining, it's bags and bags and bags of trash. I've seen the most horrendous things, including a whole furniture set. There's like a nice couch and 2 chairs coming down the river. So dumping is a big problem, and also your wind blowing in street litter into the rivers. And a lot of it, in a lot of cases, like the Danube River, like the river in the Philippines, that's going into the ocean. Doesn't necessarily go into the ocean. Orange River is pretty clean. Could be turbulent mixing within the system. It could be being deposited into the soils at the bottom of the river. We're not sure. And a lot of it can also get retained in vegetation on the banks. And Peter showed that picture of the big tree with all the stuff stuck in it. They call the plastic bags the South African national flower because there's so many of them everywhere. So rivers, they're difficult to work in. The sampling it's physically intense, and it's just really difficult to quantify what's going on in these rivers because they are such dynamic ecosystems. We started sampling in April. 6 weeks later, we were pretty much in a different season. It was crazy. So people are doing the best that they can, and the research really is starting to be pumped out now, which is really fascinating to watch what's happening. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have time for questions. Yeah. There we go. Yes.
One of these crazy headlines that we're never sure whether we should trust or not was something along the lines of 90% of the plastic in the ocean comes from 6 or 8 rivers around the world. Is there any truth in that? Is that accurate? What is your take on that crazy headline?
So that was, I'm pretty sure it was based on that paper I showed you, the global modeling study. I think a lot of it comes from certain rivers, particularly the ones coming out of Asia, whether it's 90%, give or take. Like I said, your predictions are only as accurate as the data you put in, and the fact that we don't really know what's going on in a lot of the rivers makes you question the validity of the estimations. So I think those rivers are definitely responsible for most of it, whether it's 90%. We don't really know, not yet. So.
There because things have evolved by what we've spoken about. So all this plastic going into the environment, it will eventually form some sediment, which in theory in 30 billion years would be used by something else. What do you think the role of microplastics? Is it really going to be that bad?
We don't really know. So there've been all these calls to classify microplastics as toxic. It's mostly preemptive. We know that they do, like chemicals and stuff, do absorb to the surface of plastic. It has been shown to affect reproduction in organisms, and again can cause a sense of false satiation and make those animals stop feeding. But because they're so small, and it's quite a new phenomenon, we didn't really know much about microplastics until pretty recently. A lot of research still needs to be done on it, especially in freshwater systems. But Peter also said yesterday that, again, it depends on how long that plastic is retained for in the body. You get a lot of animals that will just excrete it. There's all the shock horror of, we're eating microplastics in our seafood. But the chance of that actually getting into our bodies is probably quite low. Again, it's difficult to measure. So a lot of research still needs to be done.
What is the future?
Future of plastics. So a lot of work is being done on alternatives. So looking at your biodegradable plastics made from castor oil or other sources to make similar products that we can use in a similar way, and to make sure that those are completely biodegradable. So a lot of money is being pumped into that. I would like to see a lot of it banned. I think, again, plastic's not the problem, it's the society that we live in is the problem. It's this throwaway mentality, the fact that we use plastic once and throw it in the bin. We don't value it enough. We really need to start giving plastic proper value, whether that be making it more expensive or recycling programs where you get money back, that kind of thing. So I think that is the future. When you look at circular economies, Anya is going to go into that tomorrow, and I'm sure we can have a broader discussion about it then. But I think that's the future.
And just to add to that, there's a whole new group of enzymes that are involved in the last 10 years to make a very pretty efficient.
But again, how are we going to use those? Do we want to just release them and everything gets eaten, or yeah? Yes.
So
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Possibly. People do go out and clean the vegetation, which is pretty good to see. It's difficult to say. Mm. Yeah. Mm. No, it's especially. I mean, the Lisbech River it's polluted, but it's not as bad as the Black River. And the city of Cape Town is looking into getting more people involved in cleaning the Black River. But at the moment, as far as I understand it, it's mostly people involved in hacking out the alien vegetation. And I've seen them doing it. They just send the vegetation and all the plastic down the river because there's so much of it, it's difficult to get it out. But a lot of it does get trapped in the vegetation, but if there's a big flood, it will eventually wash it down. So whether there will be a saturation point, I'm not sure. Also, a lot of the banks are being developed, so how much riparian vegetation are we going to have left in the next 20 years, whatever? Yeah. There's a question in the middle here. Yes?
Well, my interest, did you do any research in using the beaches, sunset?
I haven't, no. But I did see a video on Facebook about it.
All of your steps over there was going through the Black River.
Yeah, well, so I was supposed to do a whole chapter in my thesis about the Black River, but I think we decided to focus on something else. But anyway, yeah, we've mostly been focusing on Table Bay area. The storm drain study, we chose those sites because they had been surveyed in 1999. So it's like a repeat survey. Yeah. I mean,
Coming through all the Cape Town where everybody lives out there.
yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's research being...
There are some, there's a group of people, Kevin Rack, and there's an individual, Mike Ryder, who works in the Sunshine region. And my colleague Lisa met with him last week, and Don Lisa from KCCSA. And in that time, they set up nets, and a week later, after the rain we had on Friday, it was pretty bad.
Mm.
Lots of those images, isolated areas, and doing what they can.
Mm. Yeah, they have put booms up on the Black River as well now, but they accumulate a lot of trash. I don't know how often they get emptied out. So people are focusing on rivers more and more. So there is hope in the future. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, things that expect only this year started actually sorting the litter they pick up from the rivers. So like they've been around forever.
Yeah.
20 years or something. And that the litter they were collecting every Thursday would just go to landfills. Now it's actually being sorted by recycling.
Okay, that's great.
But it's so interesting how all this time.
Yeah, yeah.
You take out the river, but it's still going to water.
I think a lot of the time, though, that not all of what they take out of the river can be recycled because it's contaminated.
And we need to stop it getting into the river in the first place. That's the big thing. There are these huge nets they've put out in Australia, I think it was last year, a few years ago, over storm drains. And they're these massive nets, really sturdy. They can leave them out for multiple months at a time and then go and empty them. So we need to start doing things like that and stop people littering in the first place. Yes.
Is there any, sorry, this is not meant to be an answer question, it's just straightforward.
Okay.
I'd like to know. Do you think there's any potential for conflict of interest in your work? Is much of the funding coming from plastics industry or other potentially interested bodies, or is the funding coming from people who are genuinely independent and looking for independence?
Personally, my project is funded by the NRF, the National Research Foundation. But Plastics SA gives out a lot of funding. But I feel like their heart is in the right place. So they have a John Kaiser who works there. He has been really involved in cleanups and stuff for a very long time. Of course, he also says like they are industry. They can't advocate for complete bans of all plastic, but they can advocate for some bans or reducing the amount and improving recycling. So there are conflicts of interest. There always are. But yeah. Yes.
What do you do with the plastic that is caught or that's pulled out of the river?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with it?
So I sort it and dry it and weigh it, and then I throw it away.
I mean, sooner or later you've got to get rid of it.
Yes.
How do you get rid of it?
So the stuff I collect personally, or like if we put in big nets everywhere.
Personally and the big things first.
Personally, I just throw it away because, as Anya says, it's often contaminated. In the long term, I guess we need to. In Ethiopia, they just built this huge power plant. It's the first one in Africa where they take waste from this huge dump they have in Addis Ababa, and they convert it into electricity. And so there's this waste to power plant. So if we can start, if the technology needs to catch up with the problem. In terms of recycling, in terms of getting rid of all this waste, the landfills in Cape Town are filling up very, very, very quickly. So putting nets on storm drains and chucking it all in the landfill is not the solution. We need to figure out what to do with that trash that's in the landfills in the first place. And there are solutions, you just need to start implementing them.
I have seen, for instance, those kinds of bottles filled with sand
Mm-hmm.
and used to build houses.
I think you probably
also
talk about
seen
this one.
broken up plastic used to pave things,
Yeah.
streets and roads and stuff. Is any of this happening here in South Africa that you're aware of?
So I'm sure Anya is going to speak about that more tomorrow. It is happening.
Yeah, they call it bricks.
Mm.
Again, it's not a long-term solution, I don't think. But we'll chat more about it tomorrow. Just on prevention,
Mm-hmm.
there must be legislation or bylaws to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I presume half the problem is that these are not implemented.
Yeah.
We're not considering that with the public practice.
Mm-hmm.
But Singapore's always mentioned as an example of how we can apply it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you drop something, you find
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work here because possibly money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. I knew someone was going to ask me this. It is illegal as far as I know. It's not enforced. The problem in South Africa is complicated because, yes, there's people in Sea Point throwing their stuff on the ground, but it's also areas like your townships where they don't have service delivery. So there's this, at some point they put in these huge, it's like shipping containers, and people would go and put their stuff in there, whatever, but more and more than it's people just dumping it again, and it's because they put the containers on the other side of the river, and they would have to walk for like an hour or whatever to go get it. So go put the stuff in the container and then walk back. So, yeah, littering is bad and is illegal, and it needs to be enforced more strictly. And the place to do that is in your areas where people go to have fun. They go to the beach. Like you go to Clifton, and you can see where a big group of people has sat and had a picnic because all their plastic is still there. It's insane. So, I mean, this whole like private security clearing of the beach, have private security finding people for litter. Yes.
My husband and I were in Rwanda in May, and that was a beautiful example of how a place can, we were going in the right nice and driving on the road, and we were looking around, and some little lady seeing place anyway, and we woke up in the morning, we headed out, there was not a scrap of litter. And the president has implemented this amazing campaign, I think it's on Saturday, where family goes out and we clean up the neighborhood. And I mean, that's a message for some
So,
one decent week.
mhm,
You don't have to take plastic in.
mhm.
So they, in the aircraft cassettes, took it out
Okay.
and carried on. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's fantastic.
So Rwanda was one of the first countries to ban plastic bags, but it's a fascinating case study. If you go read up about it, I was reading about that today. There's also a dark side to that. So they've banned plastic bags, but they don't really have alternatives. So you go to these markets and people are trying to take cooked food home, and it's in paper bags, just disintegrates by the time they get home. So you really need to have alternatives available to the people. There's also a black market trade that has started up. So especially women are going into the DRC and other surrounding countries and buying bags there and taping them to their bodies under their clothing, and then smuggling them over the border and getting sexually harassed, having to pay bribes, etc., etc. So yes, bans are one way to go, but everything has its cons, you know.
I got like a bit of a takeout, and I remember in the past, like they would give you styrofoam thing, plastic bag,
Mm-hmm.
plastic country, and now they do like a paper bag,
Okay.
a cardboard box, but the box is still lined with plastic on the side.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So what, like, is that actually better than the styrofoam, but it's still plastic?
So the problem with recycling is like mixing different materials. If you mix things, it's very difficult to recycle. So again, people are looking at alternatives like your biodegradable bags and that kind of thing. Whether those are degradable, that's another question, because it all gets dumped in a landfill and covered with everything else. And they found newspapers from like the 80s in rubbish dumps because there's no air, there's no light, so it's not degrading anyway. So, yeah, I don't know. Yes.
Just on the biodegradable bags, so I'm food tonight. There's international plastic bag free day every year. Food tonight. Taking pails and final and biodegradable bags made out of cellulose, cotton material, and wood from the garage. So I took a bag and I chopped up into a few pieces and gave it to the compost. And the one that I haven't taken, I've taken with one other guy. He said it would go after about 2 months. There are ways to really cut that entirely. And it is up to each and every single person in this room.
Yeah. Yeah. So biodegradable should be a compost completely, like to its molecular atoms, like goes away. It's not like your plastic breaking down to microplastics. It should disappear completely, and it doesn't. No, no, yeah.